Hey folks, welcome back to another video from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. Want to start out with the whole spiel again? Make sure you pause this video, head on over there, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you can get all the future updates of what's being posted and all the other information going on. Last video that I did on the security side was touching about case security. Case security is a very important subject. Not a lot of information out there about it that people press. I guess they don't think it's that severe an issue. If you're in a business environment, I don't know too many people who are really implementing a lot of that. Where it gets into your data side, a lot of that's important. For this one, was going to be a little bit more in depth of an issue of your data security, your port security. There's software out there you can buy that you can manage through a network, and you can see everybody on your network, what they're doing, how they're doing it. A lot of different tools that are out there. Anybody that's an administrative or an administrative role knows some of these softwares. And you could see other YouTubers and other stuff that talk about these softwares. Some of these softwares will actually lock out some of these ports and some of these things on your computers. You can actually lock out the USB ports where they can't plug anything into it. They can't plug USBs in it. They can't do any of that. There's software that allows it, like VirusScan software and other stuff, that will actually scan whatever you plug into that port. It will scan that device to make sure it's clean, to make sure that it's safe to be used on that computer. Well, there's some good and there's some bad about that. If you're in a totally secure environment where no data should be going out, you would probably want to disable those ports. You can do it software-wise, or you can actually go into the BIOS itself of the motherboard, the starting processes and all of that, and say a lot of them will let you disable the front ones, the back ones. They're broken down in different ways. The front upper, front lower. You can turn those off so nobody can plug data into it. When you get into data security, there are some weird things that you can do. You can actually enable the USB port to provide power only and not data. You can actually buy cables that is really best recommended for traveling and for public charging of your phones, because what that'll do is it'll provide the power to your phone, but it won't provide any data to your phone. So that protects this data on your phone, because if you plug into something that somebody's sitting on the other side and can see you plugged into it, like when you plug your phone into your computer, you can see the data come up, they can see that data come up, and they can access your data. Some phones, if you plug it into a computer, you can retrieve the data from the computer to the phone with the software. So if you have those kind of cables where you cannot transmit data back and forth, you can actually let people plug in their phones and charge their phones off the USB ports and that type of stuff, the data blockers. That is public, general information that a lot of people don't know. But a lot of people think, well, why would I block data so someone can charge a phone when they could just plug in a USB cable separately? They could, but that's more wiring and more stuff all around, where someone, if you have a workstation where you have multiple users on it, and they all have their own different phones or iPhones and this and that, you might want to use some of these services to block some of these things, or have those kind of specific cables, or it's an actual adapter that sits between the cable and the computer. So, wanted to go through some of that, because that's your port. You can go into the BIOS, disable on the motherboard your HDMI not your HDMI, your ATA ports that are to your hard drive, to your M.2s. So in case somebody plugs something in, it doesn't work unless they get into the BIOS. There's BIOS security. You can put a password on the BIOS. There's a BIOS boot up security that will totally lock down that computer. That when it starts, it's going to ask you for a password, and you must have that password before it boots to Windows. Problem with that is if you lose that password, there's no way to recover. So, there's security features on the computer in the BIOS that will help secure your data and make sure things are safe. Knowing these features and being able to implement them and know when to implement them, if you want to implement them, nobody really talks about them. You'll hear little bits of them in a lot of different things. But disabling ports that you don't use is usually a good thing, because then people can't plug things in, and you don't have to really worry from a security standpoint is who's doing what to those front USB ports. If you have, 4 or 6 on the back, and you have your keyboard and you have your mouse and you have your printer and you have like 3 empty where you can plug a USB in drive or whatever you need to do, and it's in a business environment, there's probably nobody that needs to use those front USB ports. And why would you need to use those front USB ports? Most of the people leave those front USB ports enabled for laziness and ease of them. So they don't have to go around and plug it into the back, they can plug it into the front. But how often do you do that in an IT environment? If you do that weekly, yeah, you might want to do that. You might want to disable half of them or very specific ones that you know what's enabled, what's not. They all don't have to be enabled. So knowing that, being aware of that, I think is very important. There's a lot of things that can be done. One of the big ones I've recommended is in your boot up files on your BIOS, the boot order, if your BIOS enables you to remove items from the boot order, usually it'll boot to your hard drive, to your Windows bootloader, it'll load to your CD-ROM, it'll boot from your NIC, IP4, IP6, CD-ROM, USB, what else is there? M.2, whatever drives you have in there, you can arrange those in a certain order. If you're able to remove certain things, like you don't really ever want it to boot from a USB, that's a great security feature. As an admin, how many times do you actually need to boot from a USB? As an admin, you know how to go back and put that on if you need to. It's a great feature to turn off any of those boot orders that you don't need. Because if you have a CD-ROM boot order that happens to be number 1 because that's the way the BIOS programmed it, and you have a CD in there, it can actually hang up the boot. I've had it do that on servers. I had to go in there and realize what was going on and go, okay, I'm taking that off the boot order because I don't need it to boot from the CD-ROM. The only time I ever used that CD-ROM was to load the OS. Load a couple pieces of software. That does not need to boot from there. So I took that out of the boot order and I don't have that problem anymore. Knowing these things are crucial to having a good secure computer. And why I say that's important to having a secure computer is you have Windows OS, Windows Server OS on your hard drive, and I put in a Linux or a Ubuntu CD-ROM, and I boot to that. Guess what? I'm just now bypassing all your security that you have for your server. There's certain boot software and bootable CDs that I could boot an OS off of the CD-ROM and access everything on the drive. Knowing that is the security side. Knowing, hey, don't let that boot. Don't recognize this. Don't do that. Or there's another simple way. You just unplug it. You unplug your CD-ROM. No cables on it. That don't hurt nothing. The main reason why you'd want to unplug it and leave it is then you don't have the empty faceplate in the front. That goes back to the other video, making sure your case is secure. If you don't have a plate, I don't want to say a plate because usually the plate goes over the plastic piece in the front. If I would take this out, it'll come out. Someone could reach in here. Because now you took this plate out, you have a space. So that's part of the case security. But as for simply unplugging one or both of those cables would make this drive inoperable. It will not work. It will not recognize it. So you don't have to worry about it booting or anybody putting anything in there because then it doesn't work. That secures that computer. You could still leave it in there. No one would know the difference if, let's say, you start getting complaints. Hey, I'm trying to use my DVD burner to burn a DVD. Hey, you might want to start questioning that person. Why are you trying to burn a DVD? Why are you trying to do this? Why are you trying to do that? Who authorized you to do this? That will lead you into an investigation path that you can figure out, is your data secure? So there's some pros and cons to a lot of this. Disable those front USBs and they start calling you, hey, I'm trying to transfer data to this USB. That won't work. That's your alarm. That's your warning something's going on. If you're in a household environment, grandkids come up, hey, I can't get this USB to work on your computer. Well, now you know they're trying to put stuff in your computer. You're going to have to be secure and know your internal security, your virus scan, your Trojan horse detection, all the malware detections. Hopefully you have all that other stuff in there. Because now you know people are trying to do other things they should not be doing to your computer or a work computer or a business computer. So I hope that explains enough about disabling the ports, where you can do it in the BIOS. Simply unplug it from the motherboard. If you don't want someone using the USB in the front, don't want someone using a hard drive, you can just remove the cable. And you know it's not a big problem, but if you, as an administrator or IT person or someone who needs to work on it, and it's just simply unplugged and you can plug it back in and use it, do what you got to do, unplug it, get it back to where it needs to be, you have that security. And I don't hear anybody talk about that kind of physical security on a computer, on making sure you understand what ports are open. And I'm talking about physical ports on the computer, not network ports, not port 80, not port 440 or 443 or any of that stuff. I'm talking about your physical ports. Because you might have stuff on there, USB-C, FireWire, standard USB-B, any of those other kind of network ports that are out there that are unique, anything like that where someone could plug in and transmit data back and forth. you might want to be aware of these things. And this is where the case security and port security all kind of intertwine with each other, knowing how to secure it all. So I hope that explains enough of everything on these two subjects. I know they're fairly short. This one might be a little too long, but it's kind of a hard subject to cover because it can be a software, a hardware fix, it could be a BIOS fix, it could be a lot of different fixes that can fix this issue, and knowing how you want to go at it. Because it might be computer A is set up, computer B is set up, computer C is set up, and one might need these features, one might not. Being able to burn a DVD drive. If you're in a secure environment where they do not burn no data should go out, you can simply unplug it. Use the same model in as a manager's computer where they do need to send out data. You can leave it plugged in. It's kind of easier than buying different systems and knowing, okay, now I need this and this one, I need that one, this one, I need this one and that one, and making sure it's all secure. Knowing, okay, I can put a lock on the back, nobody can get in there, I can change the screws. Looking for those features are very important because I've seen a lot of them where it's just simply a latch. There's boop, and there's no other screws or anything else that really hold that panel on there. That is really easy for someone to get in and out of. If you have a padlock on there, well, that's going to change a lot of things. And you can use the same style padlock with a master key on 300 computers with one key. So these are some of those little things that I wanted to bring up that I don't really hear a lot of people saying a lot about, but this is where the security part comes from when it comes to your ports. Because one of the other issues you have is someone can plug a USB splitter, hub, anything into an active USB port and plug in a lot more things. So knowing your security on what actual ports you have that out data ports and in data ports are very, very important. And to know to secure those, to make sure you secure that. And again, it's not only ports, floppy drives if you still have those, CD-ROMs, zip drive type discs. There's different formats out there, tape media. And then you get into shared data sources and other things like that. So this is what I wanted to touch on to bring all of these things all together so people understand your case security, your port security. And thank you all for watching. Stay tuned.